Well, Ellen, you've been a friend of Mr. Alexander for many, many years. Why don't you introduce him to our audience?
I would love to. Robert Alexander was born in Chicago, but he's lived in Minneapolis for most of his adult life. He's written many, many books. I don't know how many books. I didn't count them up, mystery thrillers. But he's embarked on his most successful writing of his career, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. You have written 3 books in a Russian it isn't really a mystery, a Russian sort of history fiction, and they're all set right around the Russian Revolution. I'd like to know what in your background led you to an interest in Russia, and specifically the Russian Revolution.
Well, I started out with reading Robert Massey's Nicholas and Alexandra, a really compelling biography, very interesting, very warm, full of facts, full of drama and tragedy. And, to paraphrase Shakespeare, the fall of kings is but fodder for the entertainments. And that's what that book was about. It was about the fall of the richest family in the world to the lowest depths and their secret execution. And it really, The Kitchen Boy was the first in the series, really was a mystery.
It was.
What happened that night? How were they getting secret rescue notes in? What happened to the jewels? I mean, there's so many unanswered questions.
And you give us this incredible twist at the end of that book. That's possible.
Well, but that's also my mystery background, having written a number of mysteries. I love, laying down the cards, and all of a sudden it's like you thought you knew what was going on, but there's the final card.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Russia is pretty much of a mystery to most American readers and most of the audiences that will see you anyway, don't you think?
Well said. Yeah, I mean, what did Shakespeare, Winston Churchill said, Russia is an enigma wrapped inside a puzzle, inside a mystery, or something like that.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about each of the books that you've written in that series?
Sure. The first book in the series is called The Kitchen Boy, and it tells the stories of the last days of Nicholas and Alexandra from the viewpoint of their kitchen boy. And they really did have a kitchen boy who was released. There were 12 people in the House of Special Purpose, and the kitchen boy was released about 4 hours before they were executed. And those are the kind of things you look for as a writer, is like, what happened to that kid? He would know what happened, what was going on those last few weeks. I want to tell his story and he's a survivor. So it tells, what they were going through, the royal family, as they feared for their lives and hoped for their freedom. And I think that all writers today are suffering from what I call the Sue Grafton phenomenon. A is for alibi, B is for, burglar.
Right.
And my editor said, well, that book worked really well. Can you do another one? And I looked at him and I said, well, they died. But, when you're doing in a mystery series with a main character, you're going from one episode to another episode, or you're having an inspector or a detective or something like that. But you can do a series out of historical events. Sure. And the historical events, how you do it is looking at it from the multiple viewpoints of that time and that place. Because, in the Russian Revolution, there was this horrible accident per se, and there were many participants and many voices and many different ways of looking at it. And of course, so the second book that I wanted to write about was the story of Rasputin and his final week, told from the viewpoint of his daughter. He had children, not many people knew that, and only one of them escaped, Maria, and so I chose her viewpoint. I didn't go into her days of coming to the United States when she was worked for a lion tamer in real life for the Ringling Brothers Circus, and that book did well, and then my new book out is called The Romanov Bride, and it was a really interesting book for me to write about the life and times of Alexandra's sister, who was married to the most conservative of the Grand Dukes of that time, and he was murdered, and rather than live on her, she became the richest woman in Russia. Rather than live on her money and her jewels and live in her palaces, she sold it all and donated the rest of her life to...
I think that this new book, The Romanov Bride, is really, of the three, it's my favorite because he tells it from the standpoint of a commoner and of somebody who was in the royalty. And so you have this mixture when you're telling a story. You really get a
Real
sense from
contrast
both.
of points of
Yeah,
view.
and I love that.
Well, it's interesting. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's interesting that in the construct of each of these stories, it's somebody outside that center, so that you've got almost a camera or a viewpoint
Right,
outside
right.
observing what's going on.
I mean, but you do have that. I mean, in a lot of, there's, when I'm starting a book, and I'm sure when you all are starting a book, I always think, okay, whose story is this and who's telling the story?
Exactly.
And they probably should be one and the same, but in this case, their camera's looking at this story of what's going on.
I think it's important to point out that these are fiction, even though the nugget, the base is always a real character, right? And you've done this research, but you're really writing a fictional narrative around these characters.
Right, you use, well, I mean, what I use are the diaries and the letters of that time, and they left behind many, many pages to dramatize it. So it's sort of a dramatization. And then, of course, with that, you have to stay within the narrow boundaries of the reality of and the known facts.
And you to me almost channel that now. I mean, when you write, it feels real. The language feels real.
So I got to do it tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe tomorrow afternoon.
yeah.
You have a connection with Russia. You have ties there. You lived there for a while. All of this must help inform the stories.
Well, it does, yeah. I mean, I read Robert Massey's book in the late 60s. I started studying Russian in high school. I became a Russian language major and then studied at Leningrad University and worked for the U.S. government over there. And it helps a lot. I tried to write a historical novel set in France, and it was like,
Didn't work.
There's so much in writing about a period and writing about a time, and so much cultural information that is the back seat, that's the color, of that time and place, that it has helped dramatically.
And you speak Russian, you have a business in Russia, you go there once a year at least.
So you're really writing from a really informed basis, as well as doing all this research.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And I do have my books proofread in Russia. And I mean, what I think that you have to do as a responsible historical novelist is, try and capture the essence of that time, because otherwise we're fiction writers, we do lie for a living, but you can't go beyond the boundaries too far, and you have to bring the truth as you understand it.
You can't put you couldn't take your characters and put them in a different time, because it wouldn't work. And
Right.
Because it's an integral, I forget, the organic whole, isn't it?
You've had the most success with these. I mean, you've made the New York Times bestseller list with these books, and I'm just curious, from your standpoint, what makes a great book in today's reading market?
Well, I mean, what my publisher looks for are books that will go to book clubs.
Okay.
And I have to write a book not more than 250 pages in length.
Oh.
And historical fiction is popular because it's discussable, because people are entertained and they learn something. And so those are the two things the engine that is driving my sales right now are the interest from book clubs.
Fascinating.
So you're working on a fourth Russian novel?
Oh, sure.
Okay. You want to tell us?
I'm going to be channeling tomorrow morning.
You don't want to tell us about the novel. Okay. Well, this has been a great pleasure. I really enjoyed this, and I suspect that we'll probably want to have you come back sometime soon to talk about the next 2 or 3 books in the Russian series. Now, take a look at some of the covers of Mr. Alexander's book covers, and we'll be back in a few minutes.